Good afternoon. Welcome to the Progress MarkLogic latest webinar, Revolutionizing User Experiences with AI-enhanced search. Joining us today will be David Kaaret, Principal Solutions Engineer. There's a whole host of experience using MarkLogic in the enterprise. I was going to take you through some of the ways we're enhancing search for AI. So the agenda today will include a look at AI-powered search, augmenting LLMs, large language models, with subject matter expert knowledge in your business, as well as your proprietary private data, incorporating those LLMs into search, running a hybrid query against your data, and a demo, after which we'll have a short Q&A to answer any questions that might come along. So before I introduce David, let me just quickly show you how search is kind of an inseparable part of any application or user experience to find, act on, and synthesize information or knowledge from that. And it's really key to how businesses are able to use AI within their business. And so we just wanted to take you through a quick evolution of where that's come from. You know, starting off in the 1960s, arguably maybe even in the 40s with some of the earliest computers, we looked for information, digitizing information, and then a way to find that information. You know, starting with a simple text search, then looking at web and keyword search when, you know, the likes of the early search engines came out, including Google, then looking for whole document search. And then really that semantic search, so that knowledge within the data, yeah, and making the relationships between those. And then coming through to a multi-algorithmic search, so using more than one data type or search practice in order to find and deliver the right information at the right time. And then finally, today, you know, incorporating LLMs into that search environment. Really sort of disrupting the way that people search in the enterprise. And it's disrupting it because it's the way the user engages with their knowledge. You know, everything from a simple search query on Google, where you now have AI-powered search results that summarize the results at the top of the page. Not always effectively, but they are definitely getting better. SEO and brand marketing, you know, the way you engage with your content is changing because the way that search engines are serving up these results to people is changing. So there are new algorithms that are looking for matching the most relevant page of information to the user inquiry. Enterprise search within the enterprise, you know, we have conversational agents that help employees find content faster. We have AI-enabled search visualization tools that allow you to find information and insight within those tools. It's all around this discovery. And then finally, one that you've probably engaged with already, if not before LLMs, certainly now after the introduction of LLMs into the wild, which is AI knowledge assistants or chatbots that help deliver personalized results. Whether that be in customer service, whether that be in the pre-sales on a website, say, tell me about this, you know, this new product that you have. All of these things are changing the way that people are experiencing search in their world. And so for the enterprise, this disruption, whilst we can see there's a lot to get out of this, what does it mean for the enterprise, and how is this going to translate into efficiencies? Well, one of the key ways is by leveraging an enterprise search with an LLM, improving the LLM's responses by using that whole long tail of history that we have about finding and serving up the correct content to find and serve up the correct content to the LLM, often on data that's proprietary within your business, so the LLM hasn't been trained on it. And what we're looking to do is increase workforce productivity. employees lose almost a full working day each week trying to track down information. Where was that presentation? Where was that thing that I saved? And I can't remember where I saved it. All of these things can be solved or at least aided by a generative AI and leveraging that enterprise search. So what is AI-powered search? AI-powered search is the next generation of smarter search, smarter content or data discovery. It's designed to deliver highly relevant results in a natural, conversational, user-centric way. In fact, that's what somebody recently described as AI being not an AI revolution, but a UX revolution, how we engage with our content and our data. It leverages LLMs and machine learning algorithms to understand and interpret information in real time and inform smarter recommendations in digital and mobile applications. It enables more personalization in the user experience and saves time for knowledge workers who rely on finding documents to do their job, which, if you're anything like me, is something that is that I'm definitely looking forward to leveraging more. So intelligent search doesn't just deliver that, but it also understands the user's intent. It takes the expertise, that human expertise within your business, and it leverages it at a machine scale against the LLM. So the LLM's complexity requires that we give it some explainable results. We give it the tools so that the AI can really understand, contextualize our world, and to a degree, answer those questions of why did you come to this answer? So, an AI-powered search engine comprises of that core search engine, that enterprise search engine that we've had for a number of years. It involves content transformations, and it involves applying that domain-specific, whether that is your business domain or the industry or vertical domain-specific knowledge, to the data, to change that data from information so that that person can then change that into knowledge. So with that out of the way, if you have any questions for us today, please feel free to post them into the chat. We'll get through to as many of these as we can as we get towards the end of our program today. I'm going to pass you on to David now, and he's going to introduce how we solve LLM problems with domain knowledge. David, it's over to you.
Okay, so my name is David Kaaret. So Phil's just laid out the background of how Gen AI is disrupting the search world. I'm here to talk about how you can enhance your search platform so it remains critical to your company in the new Gen AI world. So first, let's talk about why you need a data platform at all. What are the problems with today's LLMs? There's actually quite a few of them. So today's Gen AI applications are offering a lot of benefits to the world, but they also have a lot of problems. Maybe the most important, especially from a legal perspective, is hallucinations. So Gen AI makes up a lot of stuff. It's statistically based. It's giving answers that are probably true, but probably true means not always true. And so it makes stuff up, gets things wrong, and that can be a disaster for your reputation when you tell bad things to incorrect things to your customers. When you're submitting regulatory reports and you're making stuff up, it causes all kinds of problems. There's obviously data biases. The LLMs are built on the data that was fed into them when they were used, and the training results. All of that can cause problems. And related to that is understanding, so that bad data, bad reasoning can lead to stereotypes and all kinds of problems. Today's LLMs are not real time, just out of the box. They're trained on a set of data, and that's all they know. So if you want to know what was the sports score yesterday, you're not likely to get the answer directly from an LLM because it won't know the answer. And because it's statistically based, LLMs cannot out of the box explain why they got the answers. It's just statistically, it feels to them that that's the correct answer. And robustness, which really boils down in this context to if you ask the same question in different ways, you're going to get very different results. So that's a disaster for QA. That's frustrating for your customers. Some customers or users are getting really good results. Others are getting bad results, even though they're asking the same things, just phrasing it a little differently. So all of these are problems. And how do you solve those problems? So what you need is a data platform, and we're going to really dig into this a little later, but you need to be feeding your LLMs data before they answer your questions. And so you need a search and query data platform that can do things. You can answer questions, and that's really what the LLM does, is you answer the questions and you understand intent, you can interpret the data, you have easy data discovery, that there's a huge amount of data out there. When you're trying to figure out what data you need to answer a question, you better be able to locate it quickly, easily, and automatically. And as the LLMs grow, you're going to need, if you read the papers, the big crisis today is LLMs just need tons and tons of data. Otherwise they just choke. And so as a company, you're going to need, when you're providing private data to your LLMs, you're going to want to be able to bring all of that data you have. And today it's just feeding documents and you don't need to think about it. But as the LLMs grow, you're going to want to harmonize your data, make it consistent, make it understandable, make it so you can really review it and make sure it's correct. You need to be able to understand links with your data so that if you find one piece of relevant data, there's probably a lot of other data that's highly correlated with that your LLM might need to know about. So you need to understand what those links are. And you need to understand the quality of the data, that you don't want users' questions being answered with junk data, because then you're going to get junk solutions. So you have to be able to process that and understand it. And obviously, you need to be able, your data platform has to work with the LLMs. So let's go on to domain knowledge. This becomes really a key part of LLMs, is that the ones that you go to ChatGPT and so on, you ask it any question on any topic, you get back an answer. That requires hundreds of millions of dollars, endless amounts of training. And in the future, most firms are not going to want to do that. If you're a pharmaceutical company, you don't want to be feeding it a lot of data about baseball scores. So instead, you want to understand what your data is, how it's related, and when users ask questions, you can quickly go through a large set of data and pull out what's appropriate for it. And a key part of that is knowledge graphs. And the use of knowledge graphs can hugely reduce the number of hallucinations, reduce the number of irritated customers, reduce lawsuits against you, reduce sanctions by government employees. So understanding knowledge graphs is pretty critical. And so it's, not everyone knows what a knowledge graph is. More people today know what an LLM is than a knowledge graph. But a knowledge graph is really a hierarchy of knowledge. So it's generally implemented in the form of triples. So you say a song was made by an artist, and an example of that is "Hello" is made by Adele. So those are triples. And then a slightly more complex one is a plant is a kind of a tree, a flower is a kind of a tree. And by taking all of these different triples, displaying your knowledge of your domain, you can build rich knowledge hierarchies. And then with those, you're able to figure out that, the example I like to use that we'll see later on is a muni is a kind of a bond. And so when your customers or users are asking about bonds, your knowledge system needs to understand that a muni is a kind of a bond, and it needs to include things on muni. So you use knowledge graphs to understand that when customers say this, these other things that they didn't explicitly say are implied in their question, and you need to provide them with the answer. And this is an area where LLMs can really fall down. Sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't. But especially with things like part number, if you have a hammer and it has a part number of Z732, LLMs do a terrible job of understanding those are the same things, and that the answers need to include data about each of those, the technical name for the hammer and the hammer itself. And then this is a technical thing that once you have all your triples in your knowledge graph, you need to use what's called the Sparkle, which is the query language for triples, to actually pull out that data. And we'll have some examples of that later on. And so your search platform, your data platform absolutely has to be able to store triples. It has to be able to access triples, and it needs to be able to integrate your knowledge graphs with the rest of the data that exists inside of your company. And so here's an example. This lady wants to know about Tylenol. Her physician refers to that as acetaminophen. They're talking about the same thing. The statistical relationships between Tylenol and acetaminophen and other words will be very different, because Tylenol tends to be used by the general public. It's going to be used in those contexts. Acetaminophen is going to be used by medical professionals. It's going to be associated with different words. So if you, in a general LLM, if you ask a question using these two terms, you may get very different answers. So having a search platform that understands that these are the same thing and can expand your search query, so whenever you ask one of these, it'll automatically give you data that is applied to the other, is really critical for you to be able to do. And so here's an example of how what your search platform has to look like in the future. So this is before you do it. This is just ChatGPT, Gen AI in general. So it's what we like to refer to as a closed book exam, that the Gen AI is only allowed to answer the question with the data it got in its training. So you ask a question, you got an answer, and usually that answer is fine. Sometimes you get all the problems we talked about at the beginning. And then this is the more sophisticated example of what you're going to want to do. So you come in and your users ask the question, it goes to the search engine, your search platform, which here we're representing as MarkLogic and Semaphore, and then those products take the data and use the different search techniques they have, including applying knowledge graphs and doing free text searching and doing document filtering and everything else that a search platform does. And then it figures out what data applies to that user's question, and then it feeds that data to the generative AI application. And then now when the generative AI application answers the question, it's doing so not maybe just on the basis of the documents you sent it, or maybe it's using its own knowledge plus the documents you sent it, but the results are almost always going to be far more accurate, far better. And so the key takeaway here is your search platform remains critically important going forward. You know, that today a lot of search providers feel they're under threat, that the Gen AI applications aren't going to provide links to them. People will go to Google, ask the question, and Google will never go to the underlying documents. The websites that provide those documents are just out of luck. They're not going to get any hits. They're not going to get any money. But the reality is, if that's what it ends up being, you're not going to get very good answers. You really need that your proprietary company data is in the loop and is answering every question. And so here's an example of how you can see the benefits you're getting. So you come in and say, does Acme Insurance pay for the process, whatever it is, CGM? And this is actually proprietary information. So if you go to ChatGPT, it'll say, nope, I have no clue, because this is Acme Insurance and I didn't steal the stuff off their website when I was training, so I don't know anything about it. And then if you provide it just with access to private data from your site, then now you can get better answers. So this is without the knowledge graphs. So you come in there and say, yes, we do cover it, and these are the benefits of that. Now, if you combine that with a knowledge graph, everything in yellow is coming from the knowledge graph. So it includes the information that you had from the private data, but also the answer can be much richer and much better because you're using the knowledge graph to pull more information than if you just do this search, you get documents that give you that. If you use the knowledge graph to expand your search and discover all the different relationships with your question in this, you're going to get much, much better answers. So this is, the hierarchy of where you go. This is just plain Gen AI. This is just with a database giving access to the private data. This is the full-fledged smart data platform providing the real answers. So let's now talk about MarkLogic specifically. So we've discussed why you need a rich and powerful search platform for your Gen AI applications to be successful in the future. So what does MarkLogic do? So what MarkLogic does is it takes all your data. It takes your PDF files, it takes your relational data, it takes your document data, and it treats it as a single unified whole, pulls it all together, and then it gives you this. And so this is a smart data platform. So we're going to demo this later on. We'll discuss it much more at length, but this includes XML data, this includes relational data, this includes semantic data, this includes extracting facts from PDF files and making it all rich and powerful and usable. And so this is not a Gen AI application, but we're not, in our demos today, we're not going to show Gen AI because to understand the richness of the data platform you need, it's better just to do that. If you're really just demoing the Gen AI, it tends to be ask a question, get an answer, and you're not seeing the behind the scenes nearly as well as you do if you do it like this. So what does MarkLogic offer? It offers world-class search. Anything you can do in Google, you can do in MarkLogic. And as we were just referring to, multi-model queries, you can take your relational data, your text data, everything else, and treat it as a single whole. And this is a huge differentiator for MarkLogic. With other products, they may be multi-product. You'll have one database for your semantics, one database for your SQL, one database for your documents, and you have to integrate them together. MarkLogic is the primary data platform where all that data, we don't store things in different places. We don't have different databases. There's just one. You dump all the data in there. We treat it as a single whole. We spend our lives devoted to making it easy to handle all of those different things. And really, almost nobody else does. We do ontology is another word for knowledge graph. We do ontology-driven search and query like we've been discussing. We have world-class security. Our earliest customers were intelligence agencies. They demanded security from day one. This is not something we tacked on afterwards. We have sophisticated data modeling. And this has not been so much of a big deal for LLMs, but it's going to become so. Data harmonization. If you take different data sources, we'll bring them all together, harmonize. And that becomes important, not just to feed it, but also to understand and track your data, or keep track of what it is and how useful it is, lineage. We can keep track of all the changes made to the data so you can understand like where did this number come from. And that also becomes critical if you're making arguments in legal cases in court based on the data you're feeding to your LLMs. That data better be correct or you have a problem. We can always provide SQL views, which today is not the biggest issue for LLMs, but undoubtedly that'll grow. Deduplication. When you're feeding your LLMs, you don't want to just be feeding it megabytes of data every time a customer asks a question, or that'll become a complete disaster. You really want to just narrow in on a very specific thing that's really aided by deduping data that looks exactly the same and figuring out exactly every piece of data is unique and valuable. Alerting that if interesting stuff comes in, we'll let you know. That's not necessarily the biggest thing for LLMs today. And an important thing for, this is not LLM specific, but we are the platform that takes all of the new data technologies that are out there, whether it's SQL or JavaScript or XQuery, Sparkle, geospatial. We have them all in one place, and everything is industry standard. We're not building proprietary languages. So when you learn MarkLogic, those skills will carry on for the rest of your life. They'll help you get other jobs, even if you don't do MarkLogic. That when you're learning MarkLogic, and one thing that's really important is it's looking more and more like the Gen AI is going to revolutionize the job market in our space, but it's not going to be so much people creating new LLMs and things. That'll be a tiny sliver of people. In my opinion, at least, the vast majority of new jobs are going to be people creating data platforms to feed their company specific data to their chatbots. And so the real skills that you need are the data access tools, the data manipulation approaches, and MarkLogic is maybe the best place to do that because we do all of these different things in one place, and we make it as easy to understand as possible. And so with other tools, you'll have a team doing Sparkle, and you'll have a team doing documents, and a team doing relational, and you only get access to whatever little segment you're on. With MarkLogic, you get to experience all of these things as an integrated whole. And so it's a really good platform to build your work on, and also on an individual basis to build your career on. And so in MarkLogic, we fully support knowledge graphs, and we support documents. All of your relational data can be pulled in there, and all of it gets stored in one place. So we store the data as documents and as triples are the two primary approaches to data storage. So we can just dump everything into one spot, but then we can also take all your relational data and geospatial and handle that as well as part of documents. And then this is getting back to the knowledge graphs. This is a more easy to read example than what you had before. So you say you have continuous glucose monitoring. This was the question that we saw before that we were asking the LLM. And so what it did is it knows there's broader terms called monitoring devices, blood glucose, and glucose monitor. Continuous glucose monitoring is related to these technical terms, 0403T 95250, and that's also called blood glucose monitoring. So that when you're asking this, you may want to be feeding your searches all of these technical terms that don't mean anything by themselves. If I look at that, it means nothing. But if I'm in the domain and understand, I'll understand that this and this are very tightly related, and I need to be able to search on one when I ask a question about the other. And then another key thing is when you're narrowing in and figuring out, you want to be able to find the data. So you want to be able to classify your documents. You have all these large documents, you break them into pieces. And again, when you're feeding your LLM, you don't want to feed it 50 megabytes of data every time a user asks a question. You want to just feed it, determine the very tiny segments of data that apply to that user's question, send it. So you need to be able to classify it, maybe extract facts. And so MarkLogic includes a product called Semaphore, which can also be alone. And Semaphore is really a world-class platform for building knowledge graphs and also for extracting facts. So if you give it this Word document, you can pull out the year, the entity name, the jurisdiction, the market value, and make those accessible as little bits without having to just feed it the whole, possibly 50K document. You can pull out just the data, just the section, get what you need, feed it to your LLM. And so let's talk about how we do the multi-model querying. So there's all these different kinds of data. Here's some JavaScript, here's relational, here's some geospatial and SQL, and those are all there. And we enable that, and we're going to discuss why in a second. And then here's an XML document showing a very complex derivative, or actually this is a vanilla swap, so it's not the most complex derivative, it's the simplest, but it's still complex and hard to understand. Your users are going to need this. This today is not the biggest issue in LLMs, but it will be. You need to future-proof your LLM technology so that when your LLMs start demanding, today LLMs don't understand tables like that well. But that's what's going to come, that they're going to be able to need the best, highest quality data your company has is in your relational databases. And today your LLMs are mostly reading documents. As the LLMs improve and get better, they're going to want to have access to the very best data. And so you want your platform to be able to handle both the documents and the SQL, have it there and ready to go. And so MarkLogic takes all of these different kinds of information, brings them together, we store them in a single spot. So if you go to relational, you have a table called customers and a table called orders. In MarkLogic, everything gets dumped into one place, and then we give you APIs so you can query it efficiently, but because it's in one place, we can treat it as a single unified whole. And we do that through our Optic API. So that allows you to access all the different kinds of data, and we're going to have a demo and I'll show you some examples of that. But here's the most basic example, and the most important is using knowledge graph to enhance your searches and queries. And this could be against a relational system or a document system. So if a user comes and says bond and high yield, I've been told by one of the top 3 banks in the United States that when users come to their system and type in that query, they'll only get about 1/4 of the hits they should. And the reason why is because a bond is a fixed income, a debt security, also a muni is a kind of a bond. It's a narrower term. And then high yield can be high yield, junk, or high risk. And so with MarkLogic, you can set it up using the knowledge graph that when users type in those terms, behind the scenes, we expand your queries and find all of the data that applies. So you're not getting your 25%, you're getting much closer to 100. We're finding all of the different things that you need. So this is really critical to avoiding hallucinations. Is having, and also for QA that we discussed before, that users type in one term, Tylenol versus acetaminophen, and that is a QA nightmare. If you ask the same question with different terms, how do you QA it? You can't think of all the different variants in your QA environment, and your users are just going to have endless kind of problems. And by including this kind of knowledge graph into your system, then the problem goes away, you're set up, you're running. Users can ask the question the way they think about it, they'll still get all the answers they need. So let's switch over to the demo. We're going to show how you create this. This is Tableau, but we're going to start with a look. So it's a mortgage application. It's what we call the universal repository. And this is something that takes all of the different data about mortgages. And this is just a quick XML file showing some mortgages. This is another XML file showing some basic customer information. Here is some triples showing householding. So this is a very simple example, and it should be much more complex, but I want to make it understandable. What this is showing is who is married to who. So this person is married, so 001 is married, 000 is married to 001, 004 is married to 005. And so So this is as simple as you get, but it makes it easy to understand the demo. So that's why it's done that way. And so you have a subject, predicate, object. That's what triples are. And so we've got a large number of these showing who is related to who. And this can easily be expanded. So this is who's married to who. You can also have who's a child, who is an uncle, who is a grandparent. All of those things can be embedded into this kind of model and examined. We also have PDF files. So here's PDF files for credit reports. And so we have that. And then I'm not going to demo it, but with Semaphore, as we discussed, we can do fact extraction. And so here is the technical view of what the fact extraction looks like. So we took, so you have things like they were hired here, and then you come over here and we see, okay, here's where the date hired is. You can see that how certain Semaphore was about, that this actually is a valid score. And so you come here and you're extracting all of these facts from here and then making it available through SQL. And so now we've got many sources, we've done all this, and then we go to what's called the MarkLogic Data Hub. And we take all this data and we want to make a single integrated whole. So this is the trivial part, but for each of many of the different kinds of information, we create, just a flow showing how to load the data in. I won't spend a lot of time. It's a check. It comes from XML. We've decided we want to store it as JSON. And this is where we define this is actually really important. This is where we start getting into the lineage that when you load it. So the key thing about MarkLogic is we're not storing the data in little tables, which make it very hard to store other data. We're storing it in a hierarchical, complex way, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. But we can add a lot more, including lineage data. So we can say, okay, this is a check. It comes from a source called check. This is when it was loaded. It was loaded at this time. It was created by this user. And we can put whatever we want here. And anytime the data changes, we can keep track of how the data changed. So we do that. And then we want to make a model of the data. So this is all the different kinds of information that can go into this universal repository here. So we have customer information, which is related to their account. It's related to their mortgage. And the mortgage also has loan documents. The mortgage also has checks that people pay. And the customer has bank statements and a lot of other things like that. And so we define these kind of models. And then we have curation steps where we can load some of this data in here. And this is mapping the data that comes. So the thing is, you'll have many sources of data, and the data comes in, and those are field names. Some will say last name, some will say last underscore name, some will say L name. And you really want a canonical view of all that data. And so here, when you're curating different, you have your entity model, which we just looked at. The curation step takes that entity model and applies each of the incoming data sources to that model so that you can end up with a consistent enterprise whole. And a key thing about MarkLogic is we never throw away the original data. You always have the data as is, it's called. And the key thing about that is that means this is agile, that you can change the model. You can, like if you just had name, which included first name and last name, and decide that's dumb. I want first name as a separate field and last name as a separate field. You can just change the model because we have the original as is data. That's the equivalent of a re-indexing event. And you can make the model constantly, what your users see, change as your model grows and you continually refine it. So that's, you take your data that you were looking at before, the mortgages, the relationships, the credit reports, you use the data hub to bring everything in. And then now let's take a look at some of this stuff. This is I'm going to show you examples of multi-model querying. Well, first, let's look at just what some actual data looks like. So if you want to look at, here's like what customer information looks like. And so we have header. We were looking at that before, that we were tracking what was the source of the data, when was it loaded, when was it created, and here's some other. So at the bottom, we have this instance data. So we have the as is data that came in. And then we also have the curated data that came in there as well. So we have two different versions of it. But then now let's actually go to this. So we took our XML documents, and because we created a data model against it in our modeling, that automatically creates a SQL view of the data. And so now we can just start querying this data. So that's just out of the box, that when you do this, you automatically get SQL views for all of that data that you model. And then here's a basic Sparkle query. So Sparkle looks a little bit like SQL, but it's different. And so here's just an example of what a Sparkle query looks like. And so we're just finding out what accounts does a customer have. So we feed it the name of the customer, and then now that customer actually has two accounts with this bank. So we return to them using Sparkle what the queries are. And then this is creating a view. So the key thing is not your users. You don't want to stick your users typing stuff like this. You want your users to have something, your users aren't going to know what Sparkle is. Your users aren't going to know what triples are. So this has got to be in the background. So what we want to do here is we want to create a SQL view called mortgage households. And what we're doing is we're taking, this is basically the same query we just looked at without the filtering it for a single one. So now we're taking that Sparkle query, and when we run it, it registers this query with MarkLogic. And so now anybody who has ODBC can just access this query. So it looks, household accounts, this is a Sparkle query, but the user accessing it as a SQL view of the data. So we can take the complex Sparkle, the complex everything there, and then just make it for something that your end users can get the power of knowledge graphs, the power of SQL, and combine them together and get all these results. And this works equally well with documents. And again, with today's LLM technology, it's doing this kind of work with the documents is the most important. But even so, you still don't want your users to have to learn Sparkle, because almost nobody knows Sparkle. And this is just an example of showing the lineage data that we've been talking about, that the lineage is stored in what's called the Bravo standard. And so that means it's an industry standard approach that any tool that understands Bravo can understand. So now you can combine this with all your other non-MarkLogic data and have a single view of the lineage of all the data in your company. Other products are probably not going to be as good as MarkLogic, but to the extent they are, you can get everything you need this way. So that's how you build all of this, take all these different search techniques, and then what you end up with is this. So that if you come, what your users see is they have a SQL connection. So all they need to do is connect to MarkLogic, and then they get access to all these different tables of data. And these are mostly what we modeled in the Data Hub, plus what we defined as a SQL view using our Sparkle registering. And then you can come here, just see the data. You can combine all these different things against the different data sources. And then you get this, so you get the final thing here. And this one at the bottom, this is combining your SQL and your Sparkle. So what happens here, this is a risk report. So you should think of it as this is customers have mortgages, the mortgages are overdue, and that's bad. But with a naive system, you only know, okay, this customer was overdue, this one was overdue. But by combining it with the Sparkle data, you can do it as a household level. You can say, okay, so this customer is overdue, but the spouse isn't. So maybe that's not so bad. Maybe the person was on vacation or something. Maybe something else happened. But if you come here, you see this person was overdue and the spouse was also overdue. So alarm bell should be ringing now that this is not likely to be somebody forgot to mail in a check. This is the family is in distress. They're all missing their payments, even on their separate accounts. So you're able to use the knowledge graph to treat the household as the base unit instead of the individual as the base unit. And again, the triples we had here only said this person's married to this, but you could do this at any level you want. You can have triples for saying, do they all live in the same block or community? Do they include their grandparents? Do they include their aunts and uncles? And really do analysis like that. And so that's the demo. So you really want to have MarkLogic can give you all of these different skills, bring all your data together, and then feed that to your LLM. Close things off. So Progress MarkLogic is a single platform, and it allows you to take all of your data, no matter whether it's graph or geospatial, relational. Bitemporal means you can set it up so we never delete anything. We just mark it as not being used so you can recreate the data as existed in the past and make it accessible to your users, whether they're LLMs or something else. And we also are one of the best search, just looking at search all by itself, we are one of the best you get just for free text searching. That's not even counting all the benefits you get from multi-model. We can take all of your different data sources, and integrate them. And we only touched on integration. We have other technologies in the semaphore space that allows you to do a lot of other kind of integration. But we can bring them all into one place, make it understandable and accessible and auditable. And when you're doing enterprise knowledge, it's really important that if you make mistakes, you get sued, you piss off your customers. And so you want high quality data. And so you need to have everything be understandable. You need to understand, you need to curate it, make it a single unified whole so that you can evaluate it and look at it more easily than otherwise. And you need really good developer tools, which we have, all industry standard. We're the platform for doing all this kind of stuff. And the key thing is that we really do simplify your complex data. So people come to MarkLogic when they have hard problems. And as the LLMs grow, they're going to want more and more hard data. They want to, if you follow the LLM news, the big thing is they're just desperate for any kind of data they can get. The way they grow is by training and by learning, and they're cutting corners and just getting what they can. And that's not going to change. And that's not going to change at your company level either. If you want your company's LLM to work as best as it can, you want it to have access to your private data, but you don't want to have everyone have access. The problem with giving private data when you're training it is everybody knows. LLMs are statistical. They have no way of knowing whether this fact is secure or not. They just ran it and processed it and got this word is correlated with this word and this fact is correlated with this fact. And so you need to put the security into the RAG approach where you're only feeding the LLM the answer in response to specific questions. So you can figure out, does this user have the authority to get this data for this question? And so if you're in the CIA or something and you're asking things, one analyst is going to get one answer, one analyst is going to get a different answer because of their security clearances, and that's the way it should be. And so you need a platform going forward that's going to do that. If you're doing customer support, You don't want the LLM to know all the details about all of your customers because it's going to tell other users, private details about other customers, and you're going to really make people mad. But on the other hand, if a customer asks about their own account, it better know everything. So you need security that can handle that. And a lot of the LLM solutions out there today are not very good at that. And so in summary, MarkLogic for generative AI. First, if you build your data infrastructure on us, you're not tied to a model. So if you go to other technologies, they're trained according to a different model. They store everything as numbers, and those numbers only make sense in that model. If you switch to a different model, you have to rebuild everything, and this can be hugely expensive. For the big ones, the public ones, they spend hundreds of millions of dollars doing it. Even with your own data set, it's still going to be big. It's still going to be expensive. You're going to need to curate the data. You're going to be, as time goes on, you're going to need to be able to pull more and more data in there, and no matter what it is. You absolutely need the security. You need the good development tools. And maybe most important of all, you need your knowledge graphs. You need knowledge graphs to get good answers. And we do have an entire technology called Semaphore for building those, and we're not going to cover that today, or this would get too long, but we have many other webinars on that. So you need the knowledge graphs, and you need it tightly integrated with the rest of your data platform. And that's it. So if you have any interest, please ask questions now or reach out to MarkLogic, and we would love to work.